Hello and welcome to episode 166 of the Chills Will podcast. A pleasure today to be joined by Kai Harris. A little bit about Kai Harris. Kai Harris is a writer and educator from Detroit, Michigan. She uses her voice to uplift the Black community through realistic fiction centered on the Black experience. And she is the author of What the Fireflies Knew, if you're watching at home, top right here, and over her right shoulder as well. The first fiction title from Tiny Reparations Book. She's an assistant professor of creative writing at Santa Clara University. Go Broncos. You may know that I'm class of 2003. Welcome. How are you tonight?
Thank you. Thank you. I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing very well, thanks. It's a pleasure to talk to you. It's an honor to have you on. And, we're looking forward to talking about the book and some other things. But so, yeah, tell us about what you got coming up, virtual, in store, in person, and just, where to find your book, like, good bookstores that you want to recommend and social media and all that good stuff.
Cool. Yeah. You called me at a really exciting time because tomorrow, actually, well, it won't be tomorrow for the people listening. So I guess I shouldn't say that. So by now,
Yes.
the book is out in paperback, which is super exciting because it's a more accessible price point, but also there's some cool extras in the paperback. There's a read along discussion guide, and there's also a playlist that I
Yeah.
curated that you can go and listen to on Spotify while you read the book. So
Yeah.
the paperback's out now. The hardcover, there's an ebook and there's an audiobook. The audiobook's amazing. It's narrated by Zinzi Williams, who does an amazing job voicing the characters. So you can check it out wherever you like to get, your books. I always say, support your local indies. I love Kepler's here. I've done some events with Book Sync and Bookshop Santa Cruz. So yeah, but I just say support your favorite local indie, and you can also go on my website, which is just kaiharriswrites.com, kaiharriswrites.com, and I keep all of the buy links for the book there as well, along with just updates about what I have going on and all of that jazz. So you can always find out that way too.
Nice. I feel like a nerd when I say the word curate, but did you curate the playlist?
I did. I did.
Yes.
I had some help. My husband definitely helped me at different points along the way. I was pretty sold on. So it was somewhat easy to make the playlist because I mentioned music a few times in the book. So I was able to take those songs, and I mentioned some artists. So I was able to find songs from those artists that kind of matched the tone or the theme that I was looking for.
Yeah.
And then some of the songs just came about because I was thinking about that time frame. I created a character who was growing up in the 90s, mainly because that was when I was that age. So I can kind of go back and remember, like, what was I listening to? And,
Hmm.
I know I was really into Whitney Houston, and, there's some Prince, Michael Jackson,
Yeah.
lots of good music on the playlist. So hopefully
Nice.
y'all will enjoy it.
Nice. What would Granddaddy be listening to?
I'm trying to remember there were some tracks that were dedicated to him. Uh, oh, I think it was this. Hold on, I'm gonna pull it up real fast because I don't
Yeah.
want to misspeak. There was a really sad song that was
Oh no.
that it wasn't Bone Thugs and Harmony. That wasn't for him.
Oh shoot.
Um, Okay, well, Let's Stay Together, Al Green. That
Okay.
was one that I felt like KB would have
Yeah.
listened to when she was with Granddaddy. And
Yeah.
then, there's some Frankie Beverly and Maze, Before I Let Go. And these are also songs that I remember listening to with my grandparents when I was growing up. There's
Oh
Earth,
no.
Wind, and Fire, which I also listened to with my grandparents. So yeah, there's Granddaddy on the list for sure.
All right. So I'm thinking like 95 would be kind of right before like Eminem and Royce the 5'9" and all them from Detroit.
Yeah, yeah. No, there's no Eminem.
No Big
It's
Sean.
pretty old school. Because the other thing is, when I was that age, I preferred older music.
Yeah.
I didn't really start listening to contemporary music until I was much older. Because I just always listened to what my mom was listening to and my family members, and I loved that music. So
Yeah.
it took me a while to get into the hip part of my musical journey.
Right. Was were you called like an old soul often?
I was. I was just a huge bookworm. So I was always reading, and I loved reading books that were oftentimes much too old for me to be reading. Just like KB, who, at some point in the novel, she's reading Their Eyes Were Watching God,
Mm,
which is a book that I love very much. And as we see KB reading the book, she's admitting that she doesn't, some of it's going over her head, but some of it feels very familiar and very
yeah.
easy for her to understand. And that's what I remember about my experience is reading some things that were, much older, and there would just be parts that I would just completely skip through. And I'd be like, well, I don't know what they're talking about, but
Right.
I'm gonna just go with it. So
Yeah, that's true. That idea of just skipping 5 pages, it's just that's the way it was, right?
yeah.
So KB, one of the guiding books in her life is the series of Anne of Green Gables. Am I right? There's a series.
Yeah, there is. Yep.
So like, I mean, you as a kid, I mean, were you not just were you reading that specifically, but like, what were you reading, and like, did you kind of like feel yourself like a character in a bigger book? You know what I mean? Being life.
Absolutely. Yes. I know exactly what you mean. So I also loved Anne of Green Gables. And, funny enough, I didn't intend on making books such a big part of this book. It just happened randomly because I knew that KB was going to be a reader. Um, and when I was writing the opening scene of Mama and Mia and KB driving to Lansing, I just needed something for KB to be doing. Because
Right.
at first, when I wrote the scene, she wasn't doing anything. She was just only looking out the window. And then at some point, I was like, well, I should give her something to do. And so I was like, well, what would I do if I was on a long car ride? It was always reading. So I figured, okay, she's going to be reading. Let me give her a book. And without a second thought, I was like Anne of Green Gables, which was solely because it was my favorite book when I was that age.
Hmm.
And I didn't think about any of the implications of picking that book whatsoever.
Mm.
But it's funny to me now that, well, at some point, the beauty of revising is that you start to notice all these little things that you did along the way, and then you can really, dig into them and say,
Mm.
like, okay, thematically, there are some cool things that happen when you think about this book next to a book like Anne of Green Gables. So that got really interesting. But yeah, those are the kinds of books I was reading. Anne of Green Gables. I loved The Secret Garden, which I also have KB read at
Mm.
some point. At that point in my life, I was reading mostly books with white main characters, and that was one of the big things for me. Is that it wasn't until I was in college that I started really reading books with Black main characters. So I think before that, I had read A Lesson Before Dying,
Mm.
was a book that I read in high school that changed everything for me. Because before that, the only books I had really read with Black characters were books about enslaved people, or books with characters who I felt like they weren't like me. Like I couldn't relate to their stories. And so I wasn't really reading books about just regular Black kids, like me, like just seeing them play and make friends and fight with their siblings and just, regular stuff. So that was a huge part of why I ended up writing this book, is thinking about my own journey with reading and where I feel like there were gaps and wanting to kind of pour something into those gaps.
What was it about the Ernest Gaines work, or just in general, some of those that you read? What was it? Was it like you talked about? Was it just like not the minutia, but the banal, the, like you said, just like what's going on day to day? It's not some, it doesn't have to be some crazy off the wall storyline. It's just representations of daily lives. Like, what was it exactly about the ones that you picked up in college and beyond?
Yeah. With A Lesson Before Dying, I think that why so it actually was the first book that I've ever read that made me cry.
Mm.
So, and I'm a big crier, but up until that point, I was, maybe 15 or something when I read it. And I would cry watching movies all of the time and things like that, but I would never cry reading books. That was the first time it happened. And I think what got to me was there were several things going on. It was the world of the story and the sadness of what was happening to the characters in the story, and me feeling like I was able to identify with those characters and what was going on with them. But it was also the fact that my classmates were having a very different experience with the same text. And I became really aware of that. I went to a predominantly white school. I was maybe the only Black kid in that class. Maybe there was one other, but I think I was the only Black kid. And so as we were reading it, I was also just really struck by how different our experiences were. and how meaningful reading that book was to me. And then I actually started feeling a little bit ashamed that it was so meaningful to me because, when you're that age, you don't want to be different. And so I was feeling very different than my classmates when I read it. So I think that played into my emotions as well. Um, but yeah, when I got to college, I discovered Toni Morrison, and that was probably the biggest thing that happened for me in terms of, my writing journey and wanting to be a writer, is diving into her works and, coming to understand specifically, storytelling through the lens of some of her Black girl and Black women characters. And that part of her art really stood out for me. And I think that, from there, I've just really tried to immerse myself with as many stories of Black girlhood and Black womanhood as I possibly can.
Hmm. I know these, I'm sure this list is interminable and maybe you don't want to leave certain people off or whatever, but as you get into 2023, even, I mean, who are some of the writers you just like, man, when something new comes out, whether it's an article or a book or a short story, that challenge you also, because obviously you're a peer, that challenge you, but also just like put you in awe.
Jesmyn Ward, top of that list. And she has a book coming out, and right. I am thrilled. Salvage of the Bones is probably one of my all-time favorite books, and it was the book I was reading when I started writing Fireflies. And there were so many influences from that story. I think specifically reading a book that was about something that was like really big, right, with Hurricane Katrina, but then also realizing how much my focus was not on this big thing. My focus was on the things that were important to this character, this 15-year-old girl who, yeah, there's a tragedy going on around her, but also she's dealing with her brothers and they're dealing with their dog, and she's dealing with, what's going on in her personal and romantic life. And it was just that feeling of like, even if we're in the midst of trauma, of tragedy, of like these major things, when we're young people, we're also always just navigating ourselves, our own stuff, and trying to, and so in that way, regardless of all these other things that are going on, we still just feel like normal kids, that are just trying to navigate the world. So that book was hugely inspiring to me as I wrote, and outside of that, I read that book. That's one of the. I'm not a big person who rereads. Actually, The only books that I reread are I've reread many of Toni Morrison's books, and that book, maybe a couple others. I don't usually like to go back too much, but yeah, so Jesmyn's top of that list for me. I've been reading some things I've really enjoyed. I think it's up here. There's Nobody's Magic by Destiny Birdsong. Was beautiful. Deisha Filia's Secret Lives of Church Ladies was one of the best things that I've read lately, and I recommend that book to everyone.
Yeah. I was saying like a cultural marker. It's like it's like I hate to use the word paradigm, but it's like a paradigm shift. Just like, man.
Yeah, I read it, and so I have reread that. I have read that one again, and I go back to some of the stories there and reconnect with the characters. But she's just brilliant. And so I think the beautiful thing for me is feeling like you just said something about me being kind of like a part of this group now. Which hearing you say that still just feels very strange to me, because it's hard to feel like I'm a part of this group, because I'm just I've always been kind of like looking at this group like, oh my gosh, what so it's interesting to feel like I'm now at a point where I'm trying to offer my voice to this chorus of voices and get in the conversation. And, it's been beautiful the ways that I've found parallels between what I'm writing and what I'm working on and what other Black women writers are writing and working on. Sometimes it's a little too close to comfort. I was working on a book some years back, and then The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas came out, and I read it, and it turns out we basically wrote the same book. And, I think it's a beautiful thing. I think it stems from the fact that we have shared experiences, and there are things that we want to, talk about and put down to paper. So I'm still working on that one. I haven't given it up, but I did have to go back and, kind of figure out like, okay, which parts of this story will I still tell in this way, and which parts will I kind of shoot a bit? But it was hilarious to me when I read it,
Yeah.
because I was like, how is this possible? In other books I've had that experience. I feel like I read Annie John by Jamaica Kincaid
Mm.
after writing What the Fireflies Knew. And when I read it, I was like, wow, KB is so much like Annie John. Like there are so many parallels. But I had never picked up the book before writing my own. So,
Yeah.
it's beautiful, and also it gets, kind of funny because I'm just like, oh, look, we did this, I did this too. So it's cool.
So when the Hate You Give Part 2 comes out with a ghostwriter name or a pseudonym, we'll know it was you then. Okay.
You're gonna be like, that's Kai. Kai wrote that. Yeah, no, I'm gonna, I think the other beautiful thing is that we storytellers are all telling the same stories over and over and over again,
Right.
and people still want and need to hear the stories that we're telling. I think it's just about figuring out which aspects of it to do what with, to
Yeah.
play up, so I think now it's kind of like a fun puzzle for me, just
Uh-huh.
figuring out how to tell this story in a way that's going to feel brand new.
Here's a Fireflies connection. What's Ecclesiastes? How do you say the biblical
Oh yeah,
chapter?
Ecclesiastes.
Right. I believe it's from Ecclesiastes, which is what KB was like trying to pronounce because her granddad was reading.
Yeah,
But
eat
I
cheesy
believe it's
something.
I believe it's from that where the line about there's nothing new under the sun, right?
Yeah, yep.
That became Ernest Hemingway and the sun, and then I think
Mm-hmm.
it was a Metallica song, like it's like just same stories, same
Yep.
basic stories, right? But just like I said, different emphases and stuff.
And that's what we like. It's comfortable, you know?
Yeah. Well, shoot, that's why there's like 900 different Marvel movies, right? And they're rebooting the
Yeah.
same movies from our
I
childhood.
watch all of them.
So, right. Um, I wonder about like Detroit and how it shaped you. Like I don't I mean I don't know much about Detroit's like literary scene. I know there is one, but like I don't know if it's necessarily the literary scene or just Detroit in general. If you can like even enumerate or like pick out how Detroit has influenced you as a writer.
Yeah, so there's not a ton of Detroit in this book. There will be more Detroit in other projects, but I grew up there, and I think there's a lot of nuance in my relationship with Detroit, because while I grew up there and lived there for most of my childhood, I didn't attend school in the city,
Mm.
except for maybe a year or two. Outside of that, we drove 30 minutes to school in a suburb
Yeah.
that was predominantly white. That was, school I was in previously. So it was like I was always kind of living in two different worlds. And that's, going back to, we were talking about the hate you give, and I have that in common with the main character of that book. So yeah, it was, kind of, I was always half in and half out. So I think that's a part of my Detroit experience. But
Mm.
yeah, this book was set in Lansing, which is another place that was really special to me because I spent time there in the summer with my grandfather. So I didn't focus too much on Detroit, but it definitely is going to factor into other stories. I
Mm.
think the interesting thing is, I'm the kind of person that's very honest, and so I want to make sure that I'm ready to think about how I want to pick the city, because I have so much love for Detroit, but I also have had some very complicated experiences growing up there.
Mm.
So I think when I do write about Detroit, I'm going to try to figure out how to shift that, how to shift the balance between that, what it meant for me
Yeah.
in my life. But in terms of the literary scene, I didn't really get into writing until after I left Detroit.
Mm.
I started writing as a kid, but it was just for fun. I didn't think that I was going to be a writer career wise until after college. So I had already left home and was kind of out doing my thing. And then I was like, you know what? Maybe I'll maybe I'll be a writer because I don't know what else I'm doing.
Shoot, if we could only just be like, and have the talent that you have, I guess why not? Why not?
Right.
Um, so I wonder what, as a professor at the great Santa Clara University, I wonder what you're teaching, what your students are really into.
Yeah, so I love teaching at Santa Clara. It's been such an amazing experience so far. This is the, beginning of my second year. So I teach a variety of things. Right now I'm teaching a CTW, which is critical thinking and writing. It's like a first year course. And I'm really excited because this year I'm teaching that course to lead students, and lead students are first generation students at
Oh, nice.
Santa Clara. So my entire class is all first generation college students, and we have so much fun together. I was also a first generation college student, so
Yeah.
I think it's easier for me uh, to they're my people. I understand kind of where they're at and what college feels like for them. So sometimes I'm able to bring that into the classroom and just say, hey, outside of the lesson that I'm planning for today, let's just talk about this experience that you're probably having, or, how's the transition going? How are you feeling about making friends? Are you going to your professor's office hours? Are there just questions that you have and you're scared to ask anyone?
Hmm.
So I love being in that environment. And then I teach a lot of creative writing. I'm teaching a senior seminar right now,
Hmm.
which is on the topic of uh, coming of age stories through the lens of Black women writers. So it's like my whole thing.
Okay.
It's my dream class. And actually, when I interviewed at Santa Clara, it was the class that I said I would love to teach if I came, and I was able to bring it here. And we're reading coming of age fiction by Black women, and we're working on writing our own coming of age narratives,
Hmm.
and just learning about the genre in general, and thinking about how Black women writers specifically have had to reimagine the coming of age genre to match with their, specific experiences and their, the limitations that society are going to put on Black folks and on women, and how that's going to impact that, narrative arc we usually see in a coming of age story. So that class is all seniors. So this quarter, I'm teaching one class that's all freshmen and one class that's all seniors. So, kind of opposite experiences, but we just have such great conversations in the classroom about the thing we're reading. We just finished up reading The Bluest Eye,
Okay.
which was the first time I've ever taught that book, and it was a journey. It was a very interesting experience. My students did an amazing job, showing up and digging into the text. So yeah, but I teach a creative writing and social justice class that I really love, where we kind of get out in the community and do some work in addition to writing some social justice related fictions and poetries, and then I just teach regular, fiction workshop. Like, here are the basics of writing fiction.
Yeah. Oh, very cool. That seminar you're talking about. I mean, it'd be cool to take that any year, but last semester senior year would be awesome. There's just an
Yeah,
ease. I feel like an ease about that. Like you just
yeah,
kind of, and you're like, hey, I want to take a class that's really fun and challenging, but like, yeah, that's
yeah,
cool. Like of my own choice, right? Definitely like an elective. That's cool.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Um. So I'm reading from the acknowledgments. It's quote, when I was a little black girl growing up in Detroit, I got small font here. I had a ton of questions all the time and thought I could be everything, just like KB. I spent a lot of time obsessing over what I thought a quote perfect family should look like. I wonder why my family didn't look like the lives of the people in the stories I read. For a long time, I thought something was wrong with my life. Now I know that there was something wrong with those stories. That hit me so hard that I knew there was something wrong with those stories.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's been said, obviously, there's, so many different types of families. There's no
Yeah.
one family, there's no perfect family for sure. But just like, I thought that was so interesting and clever and profound that something was wrong with the stories. So that kind of takes us into, into the book, and kind of just seeds for the book.
Yeah. I love writing family stories. I think, it's one thing that we all have in common. We all have families, whatever they look like, we all have some semblance of that, or we have the absence of that. But family is a part of all of our lives in one way or the other. And so I think that it's just really interesting to try and navigate it. And like you said, to try to show different versions of it. And that's something that I'm going to continue to explore as I write, is trying to show as many varied depictions of what family can look like, whether it's, chosen family or found family, whether it's, strained family relationships. I think all of those things are so universal. We can all kind of dive into that. And one of the things I've loved most about publishing Fireflies is how many people reach out to me and tell me,
Mm.
you know, reading this reminded me of me and my sibling growing up, or reading this helped me think through some stuff that happened in my childhood that I hadn't processed, or reminded me of this dynamic with this parent or this family member, or reminded me of my, you know, grandparent who has since passed away. There are just so many stories like that that I've been hearing from people across all walks of life. And that has been, you know, one of the most amazing parts of this journey.
Hmm. The I can see myself giving this to my high school students to read. I can see myself giving this to my, 35-year-old friends. Where like, did you have an age in mind, like YA, like contemporary, literary fiction? Like I guess you and also the publisher. Like, what were the thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was gonna say, you know, it wasn't, I mean, it was a collaborative kind of thinking through, but when I wrote it, I was pretty adamant on the fact that I was writing it for adults. Um, I knew that that was risky because my main character is so young. She's 10, going on 11, and usually that would indicate a book for young people. But I knew that I wanted to write a story for adults from the perspective of a child, because I think that was a part of the project as well. Was I thematically was thinking a lot about the ways that we as adults interact with young people in our lives,
Mm.
and the ways that, you know, young people can be right there in the midst of everything going on, in the midst of trauma, in the midst of family secrets, and yet they might still be getting told to kind of just stay in their place. And you know, I think the expectation is like the kids don't notice what's going on. And I remember being a kid, and I just thought it was so strange. I was like, do they think that I can't see and hear? Like, you know, I'm right here. And so what would end up happening is I would just have all these questions about what was going on, but I also knew better than to ask them because I wasn't supposed to. So I'm formulating all these things in my mind about what's going on, which is probably scarier for me than if someone would have just answered my questions. So, anyways, I wanted to kind of comment on that and get us thinking about how we as adults show up in the lives of our young people and how we let them show up in ours. Because also, I feel like KB is the person in our family who kind of helps everyone to move towards healing, ultimately. And I think it's beautiful because she's the youngest person in the family, and she's so powerful and she's so wise. And so, yeah, you know, I knew that I wanted it to be a story for adults to read, told from the perspective of a kid. And pretty much my publisher was on the same page as that. But what we noticed is that uh, we started to become popular amongst high school aged, you know, groups of people. So now where we're at is we are starting to push that as well. You
Mm.
know, I wouldn't recommend the book for younger than high school. If you have a child who's younger than high school and you want to read it with them, I think it could be a good partner read for
Mhm.
an adult and a child to read together. And then that way, you know, you get to some of the harder moments or themes. You can kind of talk it out with each other. Um, but we have lots of high school readers now. I've actually started to do high school visits, which is
Nice.
another one of my favorite
Oh man.
things about this journey. The first time I went and talked to a library full of high school students about this book, their energy was just amazing. The questions they asked, I love getting questions from young people because they are not going to pretend, you know, they're going to ask you the questions. So it's just been amazing. So yeah, at this point, it's mostly high school and adult readers.
Yeah, I mean the point of view is just so well done. It's like like I mean, it's not dumbed down. It's not something that 11-year-old would read because you have an 11-year-old, who's the narrator. I mean,
Right.
so many examples, but like things like she being KB, and that stands for Kenyatta Bernice, right? She the word fiend is a word that's thrown around with her dad before he dies. We'll talk about that in a
Right.
minute. And she's trying to figure out exactly what that means, and thinking about when she'd heard it previously and using context clues and all that. Um,
Right.
relating it to like New Jack City, like pop culture, that kids would do,
Yeah.
right? Like something, oh, I saw it in a movie and he said it, and
Yep.
things like feeling like adults lie, which it's true, right?
Right.
Not just what a kid would say, the truth, objectively, and about how they talk down to her.
Yeah.
Just these are all just examples of that point of view that's so well done. Raccoon dreams. She's having dreams about raccoons. The whole bad word thing, right? She's like, oh, can I say it? Who's around?
Yeah.
You know, she counts things when she's waiting. She counts like, oh, how many songs?
Yeah.
Just so much like a kid. So much like a
Yeah.
kid. right? But also, you know, I hate the term's overused, but like an old soul. She's a reader,
Mm-hmm.
but she's got that innocence about her that makes everything so much more emotional, right? She's a
Yeah.
good, sweethearted person,
Yeah.
good-hearted person. Um, the book starts off in 1995. It's italicized. It's kind of set aside, and it's a stunning opening sentence that basically talks about how KB found her father dead,
Yeah.
right? Um, and she hears the police use the term fiend as they come in, and you know, there's not a lot of sensitivity by the police, you know, as they
Yeah.
come and pick up his body and all of that. Um, and then it goes fast forwards to, I want to say, June, to the summer of '95, right?
Mm-hmm.
What an interesting time too, right? I'm guessing I probably got you. I'm more, I'll be more Nia, the sister's age. I think I
Mm-hmm.
would have been 15 that year. Before the internet, really,
Yep.
before phones, where you could get
Yep.
bored, where bored was a
Yeah.
thing, right? I just
Yeah.
thought it was so cool. I mean, I know you said it there, you know, because it, like it says, it matches with your time, but it's just such a cool time, right?
That was a part of why I wanted to write that moment too, because it was that kind of moment right before, things
Mm-hmm.
started to really change. And that was why KB was able to be bored so
Yeah.
often and have to go and find things to do. So,
Mm-hmm. And we talked about the Anne of Green Gables connection.
mm-hmm.
They in the aftermath of their father's death, we later find out it's from an overdose. Do we know that
Mm-hmm.
100% for sure? 99%, 100%, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I got
Yeah.
you. Right. And so, you know, so at first there's not a lot of description of like how the family's doing. It's basically
Yeah.
to the summer because we skipped those months. You know,
Right.
she goes back to him eventually, but you know, and obviously the mom was having a hard time, like duh. And
Yeah.
she drives them to Lansing, Michigan from Detroit, and leaves her with granddaddy. And at first, granddad, I mean, he doesn't even. There's no hugs. There's not even
Yeah.
any words really. It's like, when do you think he'd say something? You know. But this
Right.
idea is right is that all of them kind of need to. And the line from the book is, I think it was about KB, is that she's, quote, turning her sad into mad for once.
Yeah.
What to do with these feelings? And just because
Yeah.
the mother's older doesn't mean that she's, you know, everything's good. She always puts up a front. She's a very strong person. um
Right.
but yeah, I just wonder about like the idea of